One of my big goals that is constantly being worked on with this show is to be as transparent with you all as I possibly can be, beyond just what normal commentators do. Really try to build a connection with you, and that starts with some vulnerability on my end, which can be uncomfortable. And so I want to bring that into this segment, which is reviewing a few different things. One of the things being Biden's farewell address. And just to be transparent, I've really been struggling with, as so many of you have been, with this moment. And as Biden leaves office, and so many of the most recent stories relating to him haven't been the most positive, and Trump takes over, there's a lot of darkness. It does feel that way. And so while I'm really going to try over the next few years to bring some joy to the coverage, even when it's difficult, so that you can still keep up with politics, but not constantly feel like every part of your body is super stressed, I am going to do that. I also want to admit to you, I'm there with you if you're feeling just a little despondent as Trump's about to have his inauguration, and as Biden's leaving office, having done a lot of good things, but most recently being known as the leader of the party that lost to Trump. And that is a tragedy, truly. So we'll go through this and do so soberly. He started his farewell address making the announcement, or reiterating the announcement, about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal.
I'm speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office. Before I begin, let me speak to important news from earlier today. After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, by my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team, and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration. That's why I told my team to keep the incoming administration fully informed, because that's how it should be, working together as Americans.
Right. So one of the things, let me actually, before giving some of my take on this, jump over to earlier this day, and then we'll get back to the farewell address. Biden also announcing this at the White House.
This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement and the whole ending the war. You know, those of you who have followed the negotiations can attest, the road to this deal has not been easy. I've worked in foreign policy for decades. This is one of the toughest negotiations I've ever experienced. And we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States.
And then just one more clip, and then we'll discuss.
The future of Gaza now, as you were saying, the implementation of this deal will be in the hands of the next administration, and basically they will shape the future of Gaza. So how do you see this future? And also, how much credit do you give to the Trump team for this deal? Trump is already taking credit for it.
Well, you know, this is the exact framework of the deal I proposed back in May. Exact. And we got the world to endorse it. Secondly, it's America's support for Israel that helped them badly weaken Hamas and its backers, and create the conditions for this deal. And thirdly, I knew this deal would have to be implemented by the next team. So I told my team to coordinate closely with the incoming team to make sure we're all speaking with the same voice, because that's what American presidents do.
Okay, so that's what a lot of people immediately jump to, right? Who gets credit or blame for how long this took versus the fact that it happened now? And one thing I'll say before speaking to that, the Financial Times reports that Benjamin Netanyahu under pressure from far-right allies on Gaza ceasefire deal. Then also Netanyahu puts the brakes on ceasefire deal, blaming Hamas for reneging on agreement. And this breaks down how even right after this being announced, there's some immediate obstacles. I bring that up to emphasize that for us to properly analyze this deal and thus to talk about the political implications of it, I think we need to see how it's going to be implemented and if it's going to be successfully implemented. Right now, it appears there's already a delay and, as was mentioned here, a putting on of the brakes. And so the fighting, stopping, and the absolute carnage, the horrific bloodshed that's been taking place, that stopping for the time being, almost unanimously, people across political lines agree is positive. Obviously, then there's a disagreement about who should get the credit for that. But I, on all of it, need to see, is this, so many deals like this have been constructed and then fallen apart. And so will this actually last? And what are the exact details as it gets implemented that could cause lasting peace? And if that falls apart, now we have a very different analysis, obviously. But on the credit point, you all know my wildly negative, I think rationally, but very negative feelings towards Donald Trump. Still, I always will choose a correct and accurate analysis over anything else. And so if it's the case, and we're seeing some reports that the involvement of the Trump envoy with the Biden administration who actually constructed the deal, maybe because it was bipartisan and no longer could anyone be trying to wait out the clock on the current administration or any of that, and there's a bipartisan, both the president-elect and the president with the same stance, that could have pushed it over the edge. Obviously, the MAGA folks and Trump are going to say it's because of Trump just being awesome. And if this is successfully implemented in a fair and just way and leads to lasting peace, then I would, and it's clear that the Trump envoy played a significant role in that, then I'd give them credit because that's what we want regardless of who's doing it. Then on either front, to exclude the fact that this is the deal that was constructed by the Biden administration, I think would be dishonest. But acknowledging that they hadn't actually gotten an agreement on that, and thus day after day, so many people were dying. And if the envoy brought by the Trump side made a difference, whether it be because of that individual, that side, or the fact that there was unity among sides, I'm going to be giving credit where it's due, regardless of party. But again, I want to see how this actually plays out and see if indeed we're already having it screeching to a halt, which very well could be the case. So the next few weeks will be critical in that. Continuing forward on Biden's address, he did, I think, Eisenhower's farewell address is known for the mentioning of the military-industrial complex and the warning of its role. I think for Biden, this could be the part of it that's remembered in his address.
It's also clear that American leadership in technology is an unparalleled source of innovation that can transform lives. We see the same dangers of a concentration of technology, power, and wealth. His farewell address, President Eisenhower spoke of the dangers of the military-industrial complex. He warned us then about, and I quote, the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power, end of quote. 6 decades later, I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well.
So the tech-industrial complex, connected to his warning of the developing oligarchy in the United States.
And this is a dangerous and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before. More than a century ago, but the American people stood up to the robber barons back then, and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy. Just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to. Workers want rights to earn their fair share. They were dealt into the deal.
Yeah, and this is going to be a huge focus of this show and hopefully of so many people's rhetoric going forward and activism, which is dealing with the very real phenomenon that's being bolstered by the oligarchic Trump administration incoming, which is the role of a very, very powerful and wealthy few that allows for sort of rigging of the economic system in their interest, leaving so many people behind. And so if I were to say this is going to be what this farewell address is remembered for, I think it's going to be the mentioning of, by a president, the developing oligarchy in the United States and the tech industrial complex, as he referenced. And there's so much more in that speech, but because I want to get to sort of my personal feelings, you can go watch it yourself. But those are the big moments. And then because it was about reflecting on his presidency and where he's leaving things, that's where I get to a huge struggle internally. Because as I've done over the last couple of years, we really documented well, I think, what steps forward the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress supporting them facilitated. Whenever you end up losing at the end of that journey, though, to Trump, even though it was Harris, but, sort of the Democratic Party, there's obviously going to be a massive asterisk. There's going to be a massive stain. And we have to acknowledge that. Because while some things are lasting, and while so much pain was minimized by it being the leaders we did have in power overseeing the recovery from the pandemic crisis, a lot will be rolled back. And a lot of that legacy will be tarnished. And that's very difficult to contend with. There was a public notice, which is Aaron Rupar's publication, piece about this, that, let me just scroll to the top here, then we'll go back to a critical part written by Stephen Robinson. Joe Biden's tragic presidency. He accomplished a lot, except the most important thing. And of course, that's what we're all thinking about as Biden delivers his farewell address. And here's the critical part. Hindsight, of course, is 2020. But had you been told in January 2021 that over the next 4 years, President Biden would organize an orderly vaccine rollout that brought the country out of the pandemic, preside over a historically strong jobs market and stock market, guide the economy out of post-COVID inflation and into a soft landing, and sign a sweeping array of legislation into law, you would have thought for sure he'd cruise to a second term. And yet the tragic irony is that if Trump is set to inherit a thriving economy, which he'll claim he restored to its pre-2020 greatness through sheer force of will. And unfortunately, neither the mainstream media nor even his fellow Democrats are likely to spend the next 4 years defending Biden's record. There's an old saying that a first-term president's most important task is to get reelected. Everything else is secondary. To that end, quite bluntly, Biden came up short. And his failure is especially disastrous given that next week he'll have to hand the White House keys back to the guy he portrayed in 2020 as the existential threat to the republic, which is of course correct. And yet all hope isn't lost. Biden delivered a moving farewell speech on Wednesday evening, signing off by saying, after 50 years of public service, I give you my word. I still believe in the idea for which this nation stands, a nation where the strength of our institutions and the character of our people matter. They must endure. Now it's your turn to stand guard. May you all be the keeper of the flame. May you keep the faith. I love America. You love it too. And I think that's really apt analysis because, and this is what honestly I hold some guilt about, because I made this point. I don't, not that I would have made the difference, but I always want to participate in the best behavior possible, regardless of if it would have made a difference. I wish I had spoken more about the profound campaigning flaws. I mentioned it, that Biden was a good governor, good at governing, but not campaigning. And how leading into 2020, what caused Biden to drop off so late was a lack of urgency around that point, which is So many people think, okay, he's doing a lot of this, especially domestic effective governance, and legislatively things are chugging along and we're achieving the soft landing, and he's following through on the mandate, which was to get us out of this pandemic and to get us back to normal post the Trump craziness. But often that leads to us downplaying the importance of winning elections. Because as was mentioned here, that's everything. When you could hand the reins right back to the guy that your mandate was about getting us away from, recovering us from. And so there's a lot of retrospection to be done. I want to do it for all of you to see as we're talking about here. And it doesn't rewrite the major achievements. It doesn't make his only legacy losing or his party losing to the very person that he had defeated. But it's a significant part, and that really hurts because it's going to hurt people, right? The next few years will end up hurting people. And so this, as we continue to process it, will be a part of a very broad or very expansive calculus we have to be contending with as to how we improve from here. Yes, there's mourning to be done, but there's also improvements to be done. And one thing that we cannot take for granted in the future is emboldening leaders who are able to really tap into the messaging and the feelings and the campaigning necessary that aligns with good governance. And it was enough in 2020, but it wasn't enough in 2024 because of a bunch of factors we've talked about before. And that matters. It really does. Even when it feels like, oh, you just care about winning, but that matters. Can't govern if you don't win. And we neglected that too much. And a lot more analysis to be done on the legacy of Biden. I'm doing an interview coming up where that'll be a big subject, so I'll break that down for you as well. We'll also probably talk about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. So a lot of discussions to be had, but I'm curious to hear all of your thoughts, and quite the time.